welcome to Know What I Mean. My name's Oscar.
My name's George, and this was a really fun episode to record, even though we got into some slightly darker topics. But I just really enjoyed the conversation, and although they were maybe darker isn't the right word, more like heavy topics, how we were talking about them made me feel kind of inspired and excited by some of these challenges. I had a lot of fun, and I hope you guys enjoy the episode.
The quote for this week is by Eckhart Tolle, my love. My first introduction to spirituality. And I don't know, I'd be curious to hear from people, but I feel like that first introduction always ends up sticking with you. I mean, that's been my experience. And you talk a lot about Alan Watts. I don't know if he was pretty early on for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think he was probably one of the biggest influences. Like I'd heard of Eckhart Tolle before and bits and bobs of that, but never, and kind of played with the ideas. But yeah, Alan Watts, definitely, I kind of really resonated with his stuff and listened to like a lot of his talks.
And you still bring him in?
Oh yeah,
anytime.
I grew facial hair like him as well.
Yeah. Anyway, this is a quote by Eckhart Tolle. When you lose touch with inner stillness, you lose touch with yourself. When you lose touch with yourself, you lose yourself in the world. So why did I pick this quote? I really relate to it, particularly at the moment. So these aspects of inner stillness or presence or kind of beingness and my relationship to that, and finding how easy it is to get lost in form or lost in the world. So despite my experience and my practice and my real deep knowing of the importance of inner stillness, I still have found in the last year or two particularly that I often find myself quite lost in the world. And another way of putting lost in the world is being kind of seduced by all the doing and activity and making and building and chasing and running after. So a lot of career and that kind of career energy of pursuing is and it makes sense. So in this quote, it says, you lose yourself in the world. And another way of putting kind of pursuit of career, for example, which is a big one for me, is like worldly desires. It's like, it's in the world, it's form, it's stuff, it's and it's not really a present experience. It's quite a kind of mind focused experience. So yeah, just to run through the quote again, I guess. So when you lose touch with inner stillness, inner stillness for me is, I guess, other ways of looking at inner stillness is it's the foundation of life. It's the base in which everything arises is a sense of stillness and quietness. So just as a question to the listener, if you look around right now at the place you're in, and just ask what's the predominant feature of this place. If you're in a bedroom, is it a double bed? Or if you're commuting, train carriage, or a street sign or a building, the predominant feature of the place you're in is space. It's emptiness. A room is created by space. Otherwise, it would just be this infinitely kind of cramped cupboard where there would be no breathing room at all. What creates a space and what creates a room is the space that surrounds everything within that room. It's like if you walk into a building and it's got incredibly high ceilings, it feels completely different to one that has very, very low ceilings and feels quite cramped. It's because we are recognizing the space that we're in. However, it's not something that you would really acknowledge as being a feature of a room in a way. You don't go and think, and think like, what amount of space is in this room? It's you notice the stuff. And so in the same way, we and our experience of life is the foundations of it, is silence, is stillness, is emptiness. And other comparisons might be how like water will be the foundation of a drink, or silence will be it's the space in between notes of music that create the music. It's obviously form too, but predominantly space. Or if you zoom in enough on a person, then we are predominantly space as well. This like the space between cells. And so it's actually this like unacknowledged foundational thing is stillness. And I recognize I've said quite a lot there, so I'm not going to go through the whole quote now, but we can just start with that.
Yeah. So it's interesting. This actually was the first quote that I read and felt like I didn't fully get it. And I think the reason is like a lot of the words that are used in it are fairly generic. And whenever you're talking about spiritual things, you're often trying to like you're trying to communicate something that isn't normally communicated. Language isn't really the best way to communicate that thing. You're trying to communicate something that's more of like a feeling. And I find that with communicating spiritual ideas, often you need to describe it from different angles. You need to use different analogies and metaphors and talk around the thing until you get a solid idea of what is being pointed at. Because it really is that it's pointing to an experience, or an experience you've had, or an experience that you haven't had, that you're trying to imagine what it'd be like to have that experience. So yeah, it was quite interesting actually to look at it, and just especially that bit of losing yourself in the world. I wasn't quite sure what was meant by that. Definitely you explaining it now has made it make more sense to me, but it was quite interesting to read it and be like, I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. But I've been thinking a lot about just the concepts of this quote, about getting more in touch with inner stillness and with oneself. And I actually didn't do it for the quote, or at least it maybe did it unconsciously. But a couple of days ago, I had got home from work and I was quite tired, and I just felt I needed some content to consume. So I was making food and I was trying to find a podcast and looking at different things, and like, no, that's not really what I want to listen to. No, that's not what I want to listen to. Do I want to listen to music? No, I can't really think of any music I want to listen to. And it really struck me how much I was really trying to find something external, because there was a gap and a space that needed to be filled with something. I needed to have some content or something, but it wasn't specific. It wasn't, oh, I really feel like listening to this type of music or listening to this conversation. It was just a general feeling of lack, like there's something missing. And that really triggered me to do, I've heard it called a dopamine detox. I don't know if you've heard of that. But essentially it's not consuming lots of content and social media and things like that. And I just started it impromptu there and then, and just focused on making my food and enjoying that process and having fun, just making my food and sitting down without any content. And it was actually a really interesting experience to notice that compulsion come up to check my phone or to watch something or to engage in some kind of escapism. And yeah, I've been doing that. I haven't watched any content or done, social media besides like replying to messages and things like that. So yeah, that's actually been a really nice way that I felt I've been getting more in touch with that inner stillness. And I really think that is the way to do it, is just cutting out those other things, because you really start to notice those feelings and the compulsion and the addiction to having things to distract yourself. And yeah, it's been really nice actually. I feel much more present in general, and it's been a really cool process, and I'm gonna keep doing it. I haven't set a date that I'm gonna stop, but for now it's definitely something that I want to keep doing and just enjoying the experience of whatever I'm doing, whether it's cleaning or eating or cycling or anything.
Yeah, that's quite a nice, very contemporary example of, well, I guess the break from social media. I mean, because yeah, like in a way you can exchange. So within this quote, then it's like losing yourself in the world is losing yourself in content, or trying to find yourself through content, through consuming content. So it's like, I don't know what I need, but I need content to help me feel more secure and to settle whatever's going on. So that's like losing yourself in the world, and then choosing to actually cut out consuming content is becoming more in touch with space and like not having to fill that space. And by doing that, becoming more in touch with yourself. So it's like a really nice example of that, like of very, it's very like contemporary and kind of like clear example of like how that might look in practice, I guess.
And it's really interesting to notice how when you stop one thing, you'll find other things to distract yourself. I think you've talked about this actually. I feel like you talked about this with apps, like how you stop using a certain app and then you find out you just start using another app the same amount. Like it just it's like that same thing that you're trying to fulfill just comes up. So I was really seeing it as like building a muscle, how you are really building your synaptic pathways in your mind, because you've got tracks of the things that you resort to when you're feeling a certain way, and you really are rewiring your brain in terms of keeping on having this compulsion and then letting that go. And it really feels that each time you're getting more in touch with that stillness, rather than just distracting yourself and putting things over the top. And I found also that it definitely has got me more in touch with myself, because you're spending time with yourself, basically. You're spending time with your own thoughts, with your own actions, rather than spending your time with, say, a comedy that you're watching, and you're spending time with these actors and their lives, and that is where your focus is, and you're getting to know these characters better. But if you strip that back, then you get to know yourself, because you're hanging out with yourself, you're talking to yourself, you're entertaining yourself, and you're finding ways to enjoy what you're doing. And you start to notice patterns that you have. When you actually give this attention, you start to notice maybe things that you think a lot that you hadn't realized, and that can start to tell you more about yourself. You can start to understand yourself the same way that you understand other people. It can be easy to see someone else and be like, oh, this person always does this, or they're always going on about XYZ. And you can actually start to notice that about yourself and just be compassionate. It's not about bashing yourself or anything, but just like getting to know yourself is a really interesting process. And it doesn't necessarily, it's something that you can do regularly. It's like how you have a friendship, the friendship will stay even if you're not in contact with that person, but it's nice to renew it and to just connect with that person or connect with yourself, and to keep that going just for the sake of it, for the sake of the fact that you're alive and you want to cultivate and enjoy those relationships while you're here. And important one is with yourself.
Yeah. And this fact that stillness is actually pervading our experience and is foundational to our experience means that when we do choose to settle into it, then my experience of that is this real sense of homecoming, because it's actually, it isn't really that we're putting ourselves in a particular state so much. It's not like we're gaining something. It's actually that we are becoming grounded in something that's pre-existing. So it's more like putting things down, like we're putting our distraction down, and then we're actually settling into this inner stillness. And I wonder if like this stillness and yourself could almost be used interchangeably in a way. It's like it might not have even said yourself. It can be that if you recognize yourself as being stillness, like completely, that is the base of who you are, then you're coming back to your foundations in a way. I think if that feels unfamiliar to you as a listener, I would describe it as being, I guess it is like when you've put things away in a room and you've really tidied up, and you walk in and it just feels like, oh, this is the clutter that was in here was causing me so much underlying stress that I didn't recognize. That now it's clean, only then do I recognize how this is great. Just so nice to be in a clearer space. This feels so much more in line with who I want to be and me at a deeper level. I feel so much more relaxed really when I'm in this tidier space. And so it's the same in a kind of more meditative sense than that. I think coming back to this sense of stillness.
I feel that it does help clean up that that mental space through going through this process. I feel like I've let go of certain things and just let things play their course, because you have emotions that arise and they want to get your attention, because your body at some level thinks you need to pay attention to this. Say if we take the model of an unconscious mind and your conscious mind. So you can say your unconscious has these things it's keeping track of, things that you need to get from the shops, or things that you need to do with your life, or things you should be doing with your life. It's the whole spectrum from tiny little tasks to like your purpose on earth. And these things are being kept track of in your unconscious. And when something is important enough, when your unconscious thinks that this is something that's important, it's like, hey, look at this, pay attention to this. Like it just throws that thought into your consciousness, and you become aware of it. Often you'll either feel it, or you'll also hear some auditory stimulus of like, you hear words, or you hear a reminder of like, shit, I need to get milk, or whatever it is. And that process of giving those things space means that they can play out, and you can go, oh shit, I need to get milk. Okay, let me just go and get milk, or let me write it down on my shopping list. And then that thing's kind of resolved. And if you're just getting home, and as soon as you're home, you're got content that you're watching on your laptop or TV, and then you're also consuming stuff on your phone, you're taking up the entire bandwidth of your conscious awareness. You're just filling it. Imagine it's like a tube where content is being sort of blasted through, and there's only a certain width of this tube, and you're just like filling it completely with stuff and content and stimulus. Then there's no space for that, for those little messages to come through from your unconscious, because the pipe is already completely filled up. So the process of lessening that flow of input and stimulus, external stimulus, what that does is that just leaves space for those things to come through from your unconscious, and then you can start actually processing those things, taking action on the things that you can take action on, accepting the things that you can't change. And that is the process of cleaning up. That's how I view the process of cleaning up your mental clutter. And it feels awesome. The same way that if you've got a terribly messy room, getting back and just being like, shit, I can't be bothered, throwing your stuff on the floor and making it worse because it's already messy, I can't be bothered to clean it up. The difference between that and then being like, you know what, I need to just get this sorted, and cleaning up your room and it being all nice to come home to, that is really the difference between having a really cluttered mind and a nice, clear and still mind. But it's the same as with your room. It's not just going to stay clean forever. It's something that you need to build into your life to regularly clean things and keep your room in a good state, the same way that you keep your mind in a good state by not always consuming stuff. And once you've maybe done like a big clear up, it's then about, maybe I will start to consume a bit more content, but I'm going to also make sure I leave space for this stillness to help keep things clear.
Yeah, and if you, because obviously there's so many ways of doing that, of attempting to implement that. And I think the main way, just taking the room analogy, is like a lot of people's habits, including mine, definitely, like on occasion, is to let it build up and then do like a big blitz, but not actually maintain a positive habit of literally just putting things away as soon as I've used them, or washing up right after dinner. And it's like, that's hard. It's hard work. And there's like a number of reasons why it's hard work. But I thought I'd just recommend a book, which comes as an audio book as well, which is Atomic Habits, which is a really famous book on like habit building. And there's breaking bad habits, building good habits, but there's really like solid tips in there for, and this is for like literally anything that you want to do on a daily basis, but in the context of introducing more space into your life, as George has already talked about, of like cutting down social media usage and things like that. That's not an easy thing to do. It is built to be very addictive, but there are ways like, deleting certain apps off your phone, choosing to set a time in which you're going to stop using your phone each night so it's consistent. There's like a lot of tips and stuff in that book that can help you to maintain positive habits and break bad ones. I mean, I thought it might be interesting to talk about a bit about why it is that we don't stay in touch with inner stillness, because it is such a pleasant thing to do, really, at its root. And I've found, it must be because I do often find this with doing these episodes, like I'll read the quote, or I'll say the quote at the start of the week, and then it'll filter in to what I'm doing. I picked this quote because this really hasn't been my experience lately, and yet in the last week I've really, my mindfulness has really become quite strong, and I'm assuming that it's triggered by this quote because that's quite a coincidence. And it's very, very pleasurable to just do things and focus on what you're doing. And this isn't me doing this all day. This will be just like me eating my breakfast, or like remembering to do that a few times a day. But even just doing that a few times a day is incredibly potent, and I feel so much happier because of that. However, I don't choose to do that a lot of the time. And when you were talking earlier about how the unconscious mind will send its little signals up of things that it wants you to pay attention to, that's definitely at the root of why we are afraid, because we are afraid of stillness. We're afraid of the space. We're afraid of opening up the space. And I think that largely it's because of those signals, actually. So it's, you know, it's obviously, it's really positive to allow things to come up, worries or things that you have to do to arise, note them down or process them as they come up. That's kind of the ideal way to live, basically. But that's so not most of our experience. You know, we go towards distraction for a reason, you know. And I've said this on the podcast before, but yeah, I remember going to the Buddhist center like 6 years ago, and someone was going to their first meditation class, and they just started like crying, like really, you know, in having this kind of really intense cry, you know, in the session, and had to leave, you know, and they didn't know why it had happened, and came downstairs and were really quite confused by the whole experience. And it's I mean, I didn't talk to her about and kind of dig around, you know, but that does happen now and then in meditation classes. And my assumption there is that this would have been one of the first times in which there was actually a break. There wasn't content consuming, talking with people, thinking about various things, deliberately distracting yourself with whatever, with food, going somewhere at work, even writing notes, you know, whatever, like literally just doing. This was the first time in which there was no doing. And this flood of unprocessed stuff just came up because it saw an opportunity it hadn't seen before, you know, and it just kind of just comes up. And so, you know, I'd say that's really a big reason why stillness isn't embedded in being a human being. It's a practice. It's something that we have to keep on returning to, and it's hard work. Is that thing of, you know, we've got a lot of stuff, unprocessed stuff.
Yeah, I think that really is, you know, the only way to do it really is just to go through that. And you can kind of try and ease yourself in somewhat, but realizing that it is better, you know, there is a reason why those things are trying to get to the surface. Maybe you don't want to deal with them, but it is going to be better that you do, even if it might bring up some tricky emotions for you. But that's how you can actually let those things go. I think naturally I've always been quite an introspective person. So I feel like I've actually done this quite a lot throughout my life. And that has helped me to mean that there's not anything too surprising coming up, that I'm relatively in touch with those things. You know, there's still, like I was just saying, there's still so many times where I'm compulsively distracting myself and not wanting to just be still. That's, you know, a big part of my life and my experience. But yeah, I think just for whatever reason, I feel like I've done that quite a bit. But yeah, it must be a very bizarre feeling to have gone a long time without really being still.
There's totally different levels of stillness as well. There really is. And like, yeah, because I would describe myself in a similar way of being pretty reflective. I don't think we would have started this podcast if we didn't identify as that a little bit. However, like I have ended up really surprising myself. One experience was on it was my first solitary retreat, and that's fairly self-explanatory, but basically you're on your own and you turn off all devices, all your usual distractions are gone. The particular retreat that I was on was around Christmas time in Scotland, and it was in a small kind of hut, little house thing that didn't have any running water or heating. It just had a fire, and you had to go and like collect the water, and it had like a gas hob, so that was a luxury. Yeah, I didn't quite anticipate how cold it would be though. But that's besides the point. I'd basically been meditating and doing my various chores for 4 or 5 days. And I think I was meditating, and I guess it had got to like a different level of stillness and being on my own basically the whole time, you know, going for walks in the woods, really just being with my own company. And I think it was on the 4th or 5th day that I had something come up that was just completely overwhelming and completely unexpected, that obviously I just hadn't wanted to look into within myself. And you know, I was so panicked by it, and like I ended up, it kind of just totally like overwhelmed me for like maybe a day or something like that. And I ended up going back to a family's friend's house like a day early from when the retreat was supposed to finish, and I was still on my own in that house, but it was just a lot more comforting to be in a heated house basically. But it was like one of those moments where I was like, there is still a lot of stuff in there. It's just that it requires a different degree of stillness and space than I'm used to. Like I would never put myself in that context generally. It was like such an unusual situation. It wasn't social at all, so that there was zero distraction. So like I'd say it does seem to be that there are different tiers of it, but I find that so exciting, you know. Like even though that was terrifying in the moment, like I did actually it felt like I resolved it in quite a big way during that process, because I didn't go and then I didn't like go and get on a train and then like run off, you know, like I did react to it and I did act like I did still run away in an extent back to my family friend's house, but I was still alone, and I managed to sit with and process largely what was coming up there and then. And then it, you know, there was a number of like discussions with like family and stuff like afterwards, just to kind of like talk it through with people. And it wasn't at all as a bigger thing as I kind of thought it was in the moment. It was just because like I was alone and it felt like very daunting and all this kind of stuff. But like, you know, it's so, but because of that space, I was able to process it. You know, and it also, it did totally throw me off guard. It was like just, it's very, very surprising. But yeah, as I say, it's like, you know, so that's why I practice, is for things like that, you know, that these inner demons and unresolved things that, you know, they're living in us, whether we like it or not, whether we process it or not. They either dominate our lives. If nothing is processed, then that's your whole life dominated by them, or they can be liberated. You know, those are the two options. You're not going to be able to distract yourself out of them. That's not possible. So
and that's the thing. If you don't deal with those things, then they end up kind of running you unconsciously because you haven't really dealt with it. So I think it's also important to remember that your unconscious does have a good idea of when to bring these things up. Like you said, this was clearly a big thing for you, and somehow your unconscious knew that for your day-to-day life, it wasn't worth bringing this up, because it'd just be more trouble than it was worth. It wasn't going to make things better. You weren't ready to process it. It would have just messed up your day and made things worse. So I think it's good to remember, like you said, there really are levels to this, and to have a level of trust in your unconscious that it will bring these things up when you are ready to deal with them, and not before that. So if you give yourself some space and some things come up, then you can see, okay, this is a great opportunity to process this, let go of it, whatever it is. And, you know, if that's getting too intense, just stop and just sit with that as much as you can and process it. And then, you know, you can do meditation or whatever it is later down the line. And, you know, you'll find yourself progressively going deeper and becoming more still and unlocking different things and seeing it as an interesting journey of self discovery and understanding yourself more and releasing parts of yourself and becoming more still in general as a person. So yeah, I think it's really important to remember that your unconscious does have a good sense. So really trust that. Trust that if something is being brought up, that it's being brought up because you are strong enough and you're capable to deal with whatever this thing is.
Yeah, and like this is quite a cool episode in a way, because it really feels like a I don't know, there's obviously advice in here, but it feels very rooted in experience, which is really nice. You know, I just kind of want to mention as well with stuff like this that, you know, because we've kind of gone into the area of kind of unresolved stuff and potentially unresolved trauma and things like that, and you know, and obviously it's really important how you treat that, you know, and with you, it has to be treated with a level of respect, you know. And there's this thing in spirituality which is called spiritual bypassing, and what that is describing is using stuff like meditation or spiritual ideas to try and essentially jump over unresolved trauma, to kind of meditate, you know, say if you were to do a concentration meditation or whatever, it can be twisted and used in a way which means you don't actually have to really go in and open things up. You're kind of gliding through them.
Gotcha, yeah.
Or there are certain spiritual ideas, like you can use, for example, like the ideas of non-self, to essentially, it's an intellectual exercise, but you know, it's like, well, who is there to have trauma? Who is there to have issues? You know, there's nothing to resolve. It's not mine, all of this sort of stuff. So that can really come up. So there's that side of things, which I just thought was quite a kind of interesting thing to bring in, because it doesn't often get talked about. But I just think in this area of, like, you know, if you're getting into territory of having to process things, there are a number of options with that. You know, it's like one of the main ones is therapy. If there's really big stuff, then therapy can give a context where you're with a professional who is literally there training for years and years to give you a space in which you feel safe to explore things like this, to be able to talk, because talking stuff through is so powerful. And you know, obviously you can have friends that you can do that with, but with stuff at a certain level, a certain amount of bigness, friends of yours might not be experienced enough or kind of wise enough in some cases to actually hold that for you. And so therapy can be incredibly powerful tool for people, you know. And then so from that end of dealing with like quite major trauma to the other end of just feeling a bit shit, like one of the reasons why I was able to process what I was dealing with on that solitary retreat was I chose to take myself out of quite an uncomfortable set of circumstances that I'd put myself in, of like, you know, not having running water, not having a heating in the fucking middle of winter, having to like make fires to keep warm and all that kind of stuff. But I was dealing with this thing that was so intense that I really at that moment felt it wasn't the right time to be putting myself under more pressure. So I went into this context where there was heating and I could still be alone, you know, and I put on some candles, you know, and I just sat down to meditate, to allow this thing to come up in an environment I felt safe in. And, you know, that's an amazing area. I think it's so true that your unconscious does have, like, there is wisdom there, you know, it will bring these things up when it feels it's appropriate. And like, you know, if you're interested in this stuff and wanting to explore it, then decide to turn your phone off for an evening, make a cup of tea, read, you know, a deeper book, a spiritual book maybe for a bit, and then just sit on your bed and do nothing for like half an hour and just see what happens. You know, like make yourself really feel comfortable and just see what happens. You know, like very interesting things can happen. Just this one last thing, I'm going off on a total thing here, but there was this teacher that I saw do a talk once, spiritual teacher, you know, and he said any resolved trauma gives you back 200% more energy. You know, it's like if you resolve what is going on, it's going to give you double that in lightness and joy and positivity. Like it literally, there's so much gains from like looking into this stuff, and in every knot that is undone makes you lighter, you know. So yeah, it's just so worth doing.
Well, that seems like a great place to move on to next week's quote. This is from Stephen Leacock, and I believe it was actually a quote that appeared in How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, because I actually had this quote embedded in my mind. Like, it just surfaced in my mind, and I wasn't quite sure where it was from, and I searched up and found the attribution. So it is as follows. Life we learn too late is in the living, the tissue of every day and hour.
Poetic.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, guys. I think I speak for Oscar as well when I say that we're both actually feeling very pumped with the podcast at the moment. I had a lot of fun with this episode, and I've been really enjoying them recently. Yeah, just super excited about it, and I would love it if you would share this episode if you enjoyed it and found it interesting, because that's how we grow. We don't pay for advertisements. We don't have like famous guests on or anything like that. So, you know, we put a lot into this show, and we would really appreciate it if you would share this to other people, things that you know, people that you think would enjoy this as well. So thanks to everyone already who's been sharing it. We appreciate it. And if you've got any thoughts about this quote or next week's quote, or you just want to say hello, then you can send us a message on Instagram, which is knowwhatimean.podcast. And we've also got a link to our email down in the description. So thanks a lot for listening, and we will see you next week. Peace.